What if the distance you feel from your adult children has nothing to do with how much you've sacrificed for them, and everything to do with how little you've honored yourself? That might sound backward, even painful to consider, especially when you've spent decades putting their needs before your own. But after more than 40 years working with families in crisis, I've watched this pattern repeat itself so often that I can't ignore the truth anymore. The parents who feel most overlooked, most dismissed, most invisible to their grown children aren't the ones who gave too little. They're the ones who gave everything while asking for nothing in return. And in doing so, they accidentally taught their children that their needs, their feelings, their very presence didn't really matter. I'm speaking today to those of you who feel that ache. You know the one I mean. It's the feeling you get when your adult son interrupts you mid-sentence to take a phone call without excusing himself. It's what you experience when your daughter dismisses your advice with an eye roll or a condescending tone that suggests you couldn't possibly understand her modern life. It's the hurt that settles in your chest when your children make family plans without consulting you, or when they cancel visits at the last minute, or when they treat your home like a hotel and you like the staff. You love them fiercely. You'd do anything for them. And yet somehow, somewhere along the way, you stopped being the central figure in their lives and became background noise, taken for granted, easily overlooked. This transition is one of the most painful experiences of later life, and it's rarely discussed openly. We talk about empty nest syndrome, about adjusting to children leaving home, but we don't talk enough about what happens when those children return as adults who've forgotten that you're a person deserving of basic courtesy and respect. The relationship has shifted, but not in the healthy way you might have hoped. Instead of evolving into a friendship between equals, it's become something lopsided, something that leaves you feeling small and unimportant. Here's what I need you to understand right from the start. This isn't about your children being terrible people. Most of them aren't cruel or deliberately disrespectful. They're busy, overwhelmed with their own lives, and they've learned patterns of behavior that you, without realizing it, taught them. They learned what was acceptable by watching what you accepted. They learned what to respect by observing what you respected, including whether you respected yourself. And now, as painful as this is to acknowledge, if you want things to change, you're going to have to be the one who changes them. Not by demanding respect, not by guilting them into paying attention, but by fundamentally shifting how you show up in the relationship and, more importantly, how you show up for yourself. Let me tell you about Eleanor. She was 73 when she came to see me, not for a medical complaint, but because she was experiencing what she called a broken heart. Her 3 adult children, all successful and established in their own lives, had essentially written her out of the family narrative. They made decisions about holiday gatherings without asking her preference. They talked over her at dinner. They forgot her birthday 2 years in a row. Eleanor had spent her entire adult life in service to these children. She'd sacrificed career opportunities to be home with them. She'd stretched the family budget to afford their activities and education. She'd been there for every scraped knee, every heartbreak, every triumph. And now, in her later years, when she'd imagined enjoying the fruits of that labor through close relationships with her grown children, she found herself alone, overlooked, profoundly sad. As we talked, a pattern emerged. Eleanor had trained her children, from the time they were small, that her needs were negotiable while theirs were absolute. If they wanted something and she'd planned something else, she changed her plans. If they interrupted her, she stopped talking. If they were rude, she excused it as stress or bad moods. She said yes when she meant no. She smiled when she was hurt. She accommodated and adjusted and sacrificed so constantly that her children genuinely didn't understand she had needs of her own. She wasn't a person to them. She was a function, a role, the person who made things easier for everyone else. This brings me to the first critical mistake I see parents make, the foundation on which all the other mistakes are built. They try too hard to please. They say yes when every fiber of their being wants to say no. They bend and flex and contort themselves to avoid conflict, to keep the peace, to maintain connection at any cost. And in doing so, they communicate something devastating to their children. My needs don't matter. My time has no value. You can treat me however you like, and I'll accept it because I'm so desperate for your approval, your presence, your love. Here's the hard truth. Respect isn't given freely. It's earned. And you don't earn respect by being endlessly accommodating. You earn it by standing firm in your own worth, by honoring your own boundaries, by demonstrating through your actions that you're a person whose needs and feelings matter just as much as anyone else's. When you consistently put yourself second, when you sacrifice your dignity for the sake of keeping peace, you're not building a bridge to your children. You're digging a chasm, because they learn to see you as someone without needs, someone who exists solely to serve them. Self-respect is foundational. If you don't respect yourself, why would anyone else? And I'm not talking about arrogance or selfishness. I'm talking about the quiet dignity of knowing your own worth, of being willing to say, this is what I need, this is what I'm comfortable with, this is where I draw the line. Your children might not like it initially. They've grown comfortable with your endless flexibility. But if you want them to see you, really see you, you have to show them that you're someone worth seeing. The second mistake flows naturally from the first. When parents finally reach their breaking point, when they've endured one too many dismissive comments or one too many cancelled visits, they explode. They argue for respect. They list everything they've sacrificed. They raise their voices. They make accusations. They demand that their children treat them better. And every single time, it backfires spectacularly. Arthur learned this lesson the hard way. He was 76, a retired contractor who'd built a successful business with his bare hands. His two sons, both in their 40s, had started treating him like he was senile, making decisions about his life without consulting him, speaking to him in that awful condescending tone people use with children and confused elderly people. Arthur's response was to fight back, to argue, to prove he was still sharp and capable. But the more he argued, the more dismissive his sons became. The dynamic had become a power struggle, and nobody wins those. When Arthur and I talked through this, I helped him see what was happening. By arguing for respect, he was actually undermining himself. He was communicating that respect was something he had to beg for, something open for debate. Respect isn't negotiated through argument. It's communicated through presence, through calm confidence, through the way you carry yourself. When you feel the need to shout about how you deserve respect, you've already lost the battle because you're acting from a place of desperation and weakness rather than strength. Arthur made a shift. The next time his sons treated him dismissively, he didn't argue. He simply said, in a calm, even tone, "I understand you have opinions about what I should do, and I'll consider them, but ultimately, this is my decision to make." Then he changed the subject. No anger, no raised voice, no listing of past sacrifices, just a quiet, confident assertion of his autonomy. His sons were initially taken aback, but something changed in how they saw him. He'd stopped playing the role of the angry old man demanding respect and had started simply being a person who expected it as a baseline, non-negotiable fact. Living respectably, rather than chasing respect, is the key. They might not like it if they've grown comfortable with pushing you around, but they respond to it. They start to check themselves. They start to recognize that you're not someone to be dismissed or overlooked. The third mistake is perhaps the most insidious because it feels like love. It's emotional dependency. Parents who've dedicated decades to raising children often find themselves at a loss when those children grow up and move away. Their identity, their sense of purpose, their daily joy was all wrapped up in the role of parent. Now that role has fundamentally changed, and they haven't built anything to replace it. So they wait. They wait for phone calls. They wait for visits. They organize their entire emotional life around contact with their children, and when that contact doesn't come as often or as meaningfully as they hope, they feel abandoned, betrayed, profoundly lonely. Carol's story illustrates this perfectly. She was 68, a widow whose 4 adult children lived scattered across the country. She spent her days waiting for calls that rarely came and feeling hurt when they were brief or distracted when they did. Her children felt the weight of her emotional need every time they spoke with her. She didn't say it directly, but it was there in every conversation. I'm lonely. I'm waiting for you. You're not giving me enough attention. That weight made them pull back even further because nobody wants to be responsible for another person's entire emotional well-being. It's too much pressure, too much obligation. Carol and I worked on something that felt counterintuitive to her at first. I encouraged her to build a life that made her happy, independent of her children. Not to spite them or to manipulate them through absence, but genuinely for herself. She started taking classes at the community center. She joined a book club. She rekindled old friendships that had fallen by the wayside during the intense years of parenting. She discovered she loved gardening and started a small vegetable plot. She volunteered at the local historical society. Something remarkable happened. As Carol became more engaged in her own life, as she found sources of joy and meaning that had nothing to do with her children, they started calling more. They seemed genuinely interested in what she was doing. Conversations became lighter, easier, more enjoyable for everyone. Why? Because Carol had stopped being a burden and become an interesting person again. She had things to talk about beyond how much she missed them. She had a life, and that life attracted them back to her in a way that her neediness never could. Emotional independence is magnetic. When you're happy and fulfilled on your own, when you have purpose and passion and interests, people want to be around you. When you're desperately needy, when your happiness depends entirely on other people's actions, they pull away. It's human nature. Your children love you, but they can't be the source of all your joy. That's not fair to them. And it's not fair to you. You are a whole person with your own interests, your own dreams, your own capacity for happiness that exists entirely separate from your role as a parent. The fourth mistake is lack of boundaries. Many parents operate under the assumption that boundaries are harsh or unloving, that setting limits means creating distance. But boundaries aren't walls. They're clear, loving instructions about how you expect to be treated, what behavior you'll accept, and what you won't. Without boundaries, disrespectful behavior flourishes because there are no consequences, no clear signals that something is unacceptable. Richard tolerated behaviors from his adult children that he would never have tolerated from anyone else. They interrupted him constantly. They spoke to him with contempt. They made jokes at his expense. They showed up at his house unannounced and expected him to drop everything to accommodate them. He never said anything because he didn't want to rock the boat, didn't want to be seen as difficult or unreasonable. But his silence wasn't keeping the peace. It was teaching his children that he was someone who could be treated poorly without consequence. When Richard finally started setting boundaries, it felt terrifying to him. The first time his daughter interrupted him, he said calmly, "I wasn't finished speaking. I'd appreciate it if you'd let me complete my thought." The first time his son made a disparaging comment about his age, he said, "I don't appreciate being spoken to that way. I expect the same courtesy I extend to you." He didn't yell. He didn't lecture. He simply stated clearly what was and wasn't acceptable. His children were shocked at first. They'd grown so accustomed to treating him dismissively that they'd forgotten it wasn't okay. But after the initial adjustment, something shifted. They started checking themselves. They started engaging with him more respectfully. The relationship didn't deteriorate as Richard had feared. It improved, because now it was built on mutual respect rather than his silent tolerance of disrespect. Boundaries are acts of love. They teach people how to be in relationship with you in healthy ways. They protect your dignity while also showing your children how to maintain their own boundaries in their relationships. Setting boundaries isn't selfish or mean. It's necessary, and it's one of the most important things you can do to restore respect in your relationship with your adult children. The fifth mistake is overgiving without limits. Generosity is beautiful, and wanting to help your children is natural. But when you give constantly, when you offer help before it's asked for, when you sacrifice your own financial security or well-being to make things easier for your adult children, you create an unhealthy dynamic. They begin to take your generosity for granted. They expect it. They stop appreciating it because it's not a gift anymore, it's just what you do. Walter was 81 and still financially supporting his 55-year-old son. He'd been bailing him out of financial difficulties for decades, always with the hope that this time would be the last time. His son never thanked him, never acknowledged the sacrifice, just expected that Dad would handle it whenever things got tight. Walter had created this dynamic by never saying no, by always swooping in to fix problems, by prioritizing his son's comfort over his own financial security. We talked about what it would look like to pull back, to set limits on his generosity. Walter was terrified his son would cut him off entirely if he stopped being the bank. But when he finally said, "I can't help this time," something unexpected happened. His son was initially angry, but he figured it out. He made adjustments. He dealt with his problem. And several months later, he actually thanked his father for forcing him to handle his own affairs. The relationship improved because it was no longer transactional, no longer built on Walter's endless giving. Unconditional love doesn't mean unconditional giving. You can love your children deeply while still having boundaries about what you will and won't do for them. In fact, setting those boundaries is often more loving than endless enabling, because it allows them to develop their own competence and resilience while protecting your own resources and dignity. All of these mistakes stem from one fundamental misunderstanding. Somewhere along the way, you forgot that you're a whole person beyond being a parent. Your identity became so wrapped up in that role that when the role changed, you lost yourself. You stopped prioritizing your own life, your own interests, your own joy. And your children, watching this, learn to see you only as a parent, only as someone in service to them, rather than as a full human being with your own needs, dreams, preferences, and dignity. The path forward isn't about forcing your children to respect you. You can't control them. You can only control yourself. The path forward is about reclaiming your own self-respect, rebuilding your own life, rediscovering your own worth independent of your children's treatment of you. When you do that work, when you genuinely start living as a whole person with boundaries and interests and self-respect, your children will respond. They might not do it immediately. They might resist the change at first, but over time, they'll begin to see you differently. They'll see someone worth respecting, someone interesting, someone who isn't desperately waiting for crumbs of their attention but is instead living a full, meaningful life that they're invited to be part of. This isn't about being cold or withholding love. It's about loving yourself enough to demand basic dignity. It's about recognizing that you matter, not because of what you've sacrificed or done, but simply because you are a human being deserving of respect. Your children don't owe you gratitude for raising them. That was your choice and your responsibility. But they do owe you the basic courtesy and respect that any adult should extend to another adult, and if they're not giving you that, it's likely because you haven't been requiring it. Start small. Say no to one thing this week that you'd normally say yes to, just to keep peace. Speak up calmly the next time someone interrupts you or dismisses you. Pursue one interest, one hobby, one activity that brings you joy independent of your family. Set one boundary about how you expect to be treated. These small acts might feel enormous at first because you're not used to prioritizing yourself. But with practice, they'll become more natural. And as you build this foundation of self-respect, you'll notice shifts in how your children relate to you. You might also notice something else. You might realize that you feel lighter, happier, more yourself than you have in years. Because when you stop organizing your entire existence around other people's needs and start honoring your own worth, you rediscover who you are beyond the role of parent. You remember interests you'd set aside. You reconnect with parts of yourself that got buried under decades of caregiving. You start living instead of just existing in service to others. Your children might surprise you. Often, when parents make these changes, when they stop being so available and accommodating and start living their own lives, their adult children become more interested, more engaged, more respectful. They want to know what you're up to. They seek your advice because you're no longer desperately offering it unsolicited. They value time with you because it's not guaranteed, not something they can take for granted. The relationship shifts from obligation on their part and desperation on yours to something more balanced, more genuine, more like friendship between equals. But even if your children don't respond the way you hope, even if they need more time to adjust, or if some relationships remain difficult, you'll still be okay. Because you'll have built a life that doesn't depend on their validation for your happiness. You'll have reclaimed your dignity and your sense of self. You'll be living as a whole person, and that is worth everything. Here's what I want you to do today. Choose one area where you've been sacrificing your own dignity to maintain peace with your adult children. Maybe it's saying yes when you want to say no. Maybe it's tolerating rude behavior without speaking up. Maybe it's organizing your entire schedule around their availability. Whatever it is, commit to making one small change in that area this week. Just one. Not a dramatic confrontation or a complete overhaul of the relationship, but one small assertion of your own worth and needs. Notice how it feels. Notice how they respond. And then, when you're ready, take another small step, and another. You're not trying to punish anyone or prove a point. You're simply reclaiming your life and your dignity, one boundary, one self-respecting choice at a time. You matter. Not because of what you've done for your children, not because of your sacrifices or your service. You matter simply because you are you, a person with inherent worth and dignity. Your children need to be reminded of that, but more importantly, you need to be reminded of that. So remind yourself today, honor yourself, respect yourself, and watch how the world, including your children, begins to respond differently to the person you're becoming.